Okay, we are back with Senate Minority
There we
Leader.
go.
What? I'm sorry?
I'm just saying, there we go, because it just flashed that we're being recorded.
Okay, so it worked. And so we want to welcome in once again Senator Bruce Tarr and thank all of those who are watching this. And Senator Bruce Tarr is the Massachusetts Senate Minority Leader. And I know that it has been an incredibly hectic time for you over the past couple of weeks, Senator. And, you know, this is something that we appreciate. You're giving us updates from the State House. So where would you like to start today?
Well, why don't we talk about what's going on with the state budget, Rick, as a continuation of our prior discussions. And I can do that by telling you that we are now at the point where the Senate has passed its version of the state budget and the House has passed its version. And so under the rules, what could happen is one side could agree to the other's version, but that's not going to happen. What will happen is we'll appoint a conference committee that'll be 3 members of the Senate and 3 members of the House, and they'll work to reconcile the 2 different versions of the budget. And that process can take a while, but the goal is to be able to have a new budget in place by the beginning of the fiscal year, which is July 1st. And in between now and then, what needs to happen is the conferees reconcile the budget into one budget that's known as a conference committee report. Each branch needs to vote on that, the House and the Senate, and then it goes to the governor, and the governor has several options at that point as well. So there's a few steps that need to happen, but right now we're on track to be able to have a budget by the beginning of the new fiscal year. And Rick, just to recap a little bit, when it comes to the Senate version of the budget, the total amount of spending was over $47 billion. It did represent an increase over the current fiscal year. There were about 923 amendments that were filed. And of those 923, 109 of them were filed by me. And of those 109, roughly 29 passed across a whole series of subjects. And, you know, we've read some reporting lately about the amendment that we're able to get relative to protecting right whales, which also protects the lobster industry. We're able to put another $1 million through one of our amendments into regional school transportation to help with those costs. So there are a lot of different things that pass as budget amendments. They're really across the whole spectrum. And just to give you 2 more examples, another amendment that I had passed, again, with the support, the overwhelming support of my colleagues. This is a team effort. This is not an individual effort. But we were able to get another amendment passed to codify and make permanent a task force on hate crimes that was originally created by an executive order by Governor Weld many years ago. And given the increase in hate crimes that we're seeing, I wanted to make sure that we made that task force permanent and that we added legislators to it so that advocacy groups could be at the same table with legislators to think about the problems that hate crimes present and how to solve them. And then the last amendment that I'll mention is one that deals with the issue of retaining and recruiting qualified police officers, because we certainly need an effective, trained, talented police force across the Commonwealth. And so we wanted to put together different groups to talk about the best way to do that. And so groups, Rick, as divergent as the ACLU and many of the police unions to, again, sit at the same table and talk about how we're going to make sure that we have the workforce that we need that is capable of responding fairly and safely to the problems that we face on any given day at any given moment.
Sounds incredibly important. Senator, what's the, I don't know how to ask it, but the general feeling about the budget? Is it on track to get passed and get this thing behind us?
It is. It is, Rick, and there are 2 significant things that are unusual that are happening. Number one is that we are running above benchmark in terms of our revenue collections, and that was not a given because we were transitioning, hopefully, out of the pandemic completely, but yet still experiencing some of the problems with the pandemic that it caused for our economy. But we are above benchmark, so we are doing well in terms of our collections. And then in addition to that, we're receiving a tremendous amount of money from the federal government. And so that also gives us the confidence that this budget is sustainable because we have additional resources that we wouldn't otherwise have. And in fact, it's anticipated that next week, we are going to deal with roughly $5.4 billion that we're receiving from the federal government that we're going to put into a special account for the purpose of determining how to best spend that money in the months to come. What's going to happen next week will not spend the money, but it will put it into an account that sets up a spending process that will be much like the state budget.
Well, I was just thinking you probably couldn't slide a few million to MSONEWSports, but that's okay. I understand that. You mentioned just what do they call that? Not gerrymandering. What's that called? Anyway, you mentioned a couple of weeks ago a constitutional convention is coming up. Could you elaborate on that and where we are?
Yeah. So we met as we were required to do last month to deal with the Constitutional Convention. And again, that's when the House and the Senate meet jointly in the House chamber to discuss proposed amendments to the state constitution. And the one that has gotten a lot of attention, which I'm sure many folks are familiar with, has to do with a surtax on income above $1 million. Now, because that was passed in the last legislative session, it comes up first in this legislative session. And if it's passed again, then it will go to the ballot for the consideration of the voters. So on Wednesday, we are having another constitutional convention. That's when we recess to. And that question will come up first. And there may be several others. For instance, I have proposed that if we're going to put tax rates in the Constitution, then we also put a limit on taxation in the Constitution at 6.25% for income tax. There are a number of different questions. At least some of them will come up on Wednesday, maybe not all of them, but that's a very important thing to know about.
Coming out of COVID, Senator, many restrictions are being lifted, but I did read in the paper that there are some extensions that are being considered. Could you elaborate on that, please?
There are, Rick. There are a tremendous number of things that were done either by executive order by the governor or by the legislature to deal with the conditions that were occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, you may recall that the governor is going to lift completely the public health emergency order on June 15th. And many of these emergency actions are tied to that order. And so we now in the legislature are working at considering which things may need to be extended and which should be allowed to terminate. And so I'll give you an example. One of the things that has a tremendous amount of support, and I filed a bill on this, and I have also filed a budget amendment, which did not pass, but I anticipate we'll reach consensus on the issue anyway, is to allow restaurants to continue outdoor dining. It's something that seems to have been received very favorably by consumers. There does not seem to be opposition to it. And it's something that we can do to help restaurants recover because we know they've had a very difficult time during the pandemic. So that's one example. There are other examples like remote meetings. So one of the things that has been allowed to happen is to have local boards like a select board or a city council be able to meet remotely using Zoom or another electronic platform. We need to think about, do we want to extend that, or do we want to modify it, or do we want to let it terminate? All of that needs to happen in a relatively short period of time. And so we continue to deal with the issue, and I anticipate that next week, as soon as Thursday, you could see the legislature, at least in the Senate, taking up legislation to extend some of these things. Okay, is there anything I missed? No, and I don't think I missed anything either. I apologize for going on at length, but a lot of important stuff. Very informative. Very informative. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Rick. Look forward to talking with you again soon.